Boy runs after his missing dog. When he finds him, he's with someone the boy didn't expect to see again. The small coastal town of Whitestone was the kind of place where everybody knew everyone. Its mornings were usually filled with the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs and the distant call of fishermen heading out to sea. Among the familiar faces was Ethan, a 10-year-old boy whose best friend in the world was a golden retriever named Max. Max wasn't just any dog. He had been with Ethan since he was a baby, gifted to him on his first birthday. Wherever Ethan went, Max followed, his golden coat shining in the sun as he ran alongside his owner. For Ethan, Max wasn't just a pet, he was family. One rainy Friday, Ethan came home from school, throwing his backpack onto the kitchen floor. "Max," he called out, expecting the dog to appear, tail wagging, ready for their usual game of fetch in the yard. But Max didn't come. At first, Ethan thought Max might be hiding or napping somewhere. He searched the house, calling out his name, but with every empty corner, his worry grew. By the time his mom came home from work, Ethan was frantic. "Mom, Max is gone," he exclaimed, his voice trembling. "Gone? What do you mean?" Mrs. Carter asked, setting down her umbrella. "I've looked everywhere. He's not in the house or the yard." Mrs. Carter's expression grew serious. "Maybe he got out of the gate. Let's check the neighborhood." With flashlights in hand, they combed the streets, calling Max's name. The rain had stopped, leaving the air thick with the scent of wet grass and earth. Neighbors joined the search, but as night fell, there was still no sign of Max. The next morning, Ethan woke up with a renewed determination. He made posters with Max's picture and plastered them around Whitestone. As he rode his bike from one end of town to the other, he couldn't shake the feeling that Max was out there somewhere, waiting for him. Days passed. Ethan checked the local animal shelter and called every vet in town, but no one had seen Max. Then, a week later, while walking along the cliffs, Ethan noticed a torn piece of Max's leash tangled in some bushes. His heart raced. "Max!" he shouted into the distance. The only response was the sound of waves crashing far below. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan was sitting on the porch when his mom walked out. "You've done everything you could, Ethan," she said softly. "Sometimes, we have to accept that we might not get the answers we're looking for." But Ethan couldn't give up. Something deep inside him refused to believe that Max was gone forever. The next morning, he packed a small backpack with water, snacks, and Max's favorite toy, determined to follow the cliffs further than he ever had before. With his dad's old binoculars slung around his neck, he set off at dawn. As Ethan reached the edge of Whitestone, the landscape became wilder. Overgrown paths and dense woods slowed his progress, but he pressed on. Hours later, tired and hungry, he heard something. A faint bark carried on the wind. "Max!" Ethan shouted, hope surging through him. He scrambled through the trees toward the sound, his heart pounding. Emerging into a clearing, he froze. There was Max, standing protectively beside a figure Ethan hadn't seen in years. A man whose face was weathered by time and hardship. A man Ethan never thought he'd see again. "Dad?" Ethan whispered. Ethan stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Max barked again, breaking the silence, and the golden retriever bounded toward him. Ethan dropped to his knees, throwing his arms around Max's neck, relief flooding through him. "Max, I knew I'd find you," he whispered into the dog's fur, tears brimming in his eyes. But the man standing a few feet away held Ethan's attention. His face was unmistakable, though lined with years of absence and a ruggedness Ethan didn't remember. "Ethan," the man said, his voice low but steady. Ethan looked up, his arms still around Max. "Dad." His voice cracked, filled with a mix of confusion and disbelief. "Is it really you?" "Yes," his father replied, taking a hesitant step forward. "It's me." For a moment, neither spoke. Max wagged his tail, glancing between the two, seemingly oblivious to the storm of emotions swirling around them. Finally, Ethan found his voice. What are you doing here?" he asked, his tone sharp with pent-up anger. You've been gone for years. Why didn't you come back?" His father sighed, his shoulders sagging under an invisible weight. "Ethan, it's a long story. One I owe you, but I didn't expect to see you here like this." Ethan stood, gripping Max's leash tightly. "Well, here I am. So tell me." His father hesitated, looking at the boy he'd left behind. "I didn't want to leave, Ethan. You have to believe me. But things, they got complicated. I thought staying away was best for everyone." "Best for everyone?" Ethan echoed, his voice rising. "You left me and Mom. Do you know how hard it's been without you?" "I know," his father said, his voice barely audible. I thought I was protecting you. Protecting us from what?" Ethan demanded. His father gestured to a makeshift camp nearby, a small tent and a fire pit surrounded by scattered belongings. "Why don't we sit down? I'll explain everything." Ethan hesitated, torn between the anger bubbling inside him and the curiosity he couldn't ignore. Finally, he nodded. Together, they walked toward the camp, Max trotting happily alongside. The camp was modest but well-kept. Ethan watched as his father poured water into a tin cup and handed it to him. "I've been living out here for a while," his father began, "trying to sort things out." "Sort what out?" Ethan asked, his tone still wary. "I made mistakes," his father admitted, sitting across from him. "Big ones. I thought I could fix them. But I didn't realize how much I was losing in the process." "Fix what?" Ethan pressed. His father ran a hand through his graying hair. "I was struggling, Ethan. Work wasn't going well, and I made some poor decisions, ones I didn't want you or your mom to deal with. So I left." "That doesn't make it okay," Ethan shot back. "You didn't even say goodbye." "I know," his father said, his voice heavy with regret. "And I've regretted it every day since. I thought about coming back so many times, but I didn't know how to face you or your mom." Ethan stared at him, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. He had spent years imagining this moment, rehearsing all the things he would say if he ever saw his father again. But now, sitting here, words failed him. As silence settled between them, Max nudged Ethan's hand with his nose, as if to remind him of why he had come. Ethan looked down at the dog, then back at his father. "How did you find Max?" he asked, changing the subject. His father smiled faintly. "He found me, actually. A few days ago, I heard barking near the cliffs. When I went to check, there he was, his leash caught in some bushes. He seemed lost, so I brought him back here." "You didn't think to take him home?" Ethan asked, his frustration flaring again. "I didn't know if I could," his father admitted. "I wasn't sure if I'd be welcome." Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to shout, to tell his father how unfair it all was. But Max leaned into his side, grounding him. Instead, he asked, "Are you coming back now?" His father hesitated, looking down at his hands. "I want to, Ethan. More than anything. But only if you and your mom will have me." Ethan didn't respond right away. He looked out at the cliffs, the ocean stretching endlessly beyond them. For years, he had wished for this moment, and now that it was here, he didn't know what to feel. Finally, he stood, pulling Max's leash. "I need to think," he said, "but you should come back to town. Mom deserves to know you're alive." His father nodded. "You're right. I'll come with you." As they packed up the camp, Ethan couldn't help but wonder what his mom would say, and whether their family could ever truly be whole again. The path back to Whitestone was steep and uneven, the kind of terrain that demanded silence as each step needed careful placement. Max trotted ahead, his tail wagging with the carefree energy that Ethan envied in that moment. Behind him, Ethan's father walked quietly, his eyes flickering between the cliffs and his son, as though searching for the right words to fill the heavy silence. Ethan kept his gaze fixed on the trail. Questions swirled in his mind, but none felt safe to ask. He didn't trust his voice not to betray the storm of emotions roiling inside him. Anger, sadness, and something far harder to name. After nearly an hour of walking, Ethan finally spoke. "Does Mom know you're here?" His father sighed, his voice low and weighted. "No, she doesn't. She's going to be mad," Ethan said, a bitter edge in his tone. I know, his father admitted. And she has every right to be. The words did little to comfort Ethan. He quickened his pace and Max, sensing the tension, slowed his own steps, sticking close to the boy's side. By the time they reached the outskirts of Whitestone, the sun was high in the sky, casting long shadows over the familiar streets. The salty breeze carried the chatter of locals and the hum of life in the small town. Ethan stopped at the edge of the path and turned to his father. "You can't just show up like nothing happened," he said, his voice trembling. "It's not that simple." "I know it's not," his father said, his eyes meeting Ethan's. "But I have to try." Ethan hesitated. Part of him wanted to turn around, to keep walking and leave his father to sort things out on his own. But Max whined softly, nudging Ethan's leg, as if urging him forward. With a resigned nod, Ethan started toward home. The Carter house was small but warm, its pale blue paint faded by years of salty air. Max barked as they approached, the sound carrying through the open window. Moments later, the front door creaked open, and Mrs. Carter stepped onto the porch. "Ethan, you're—" Her words stopped abruptly as her eyes landed on the man standing a few feet behind her son. Her expression shifted from relief to shock, and then something darker. "Ethan," she said, her voice tight, "go inside." "But Mom," inside. "Now." Ethan hesitated, glancing between his parents. He wanted to protest but decided against it. He gave Max's leash a gentle tug and walked up the steps, slipping past his mother into the house. From the window, he watched as the confrontation unfolded. Mrs. Carter crossed her arms, her body rigid. "What are you doing here, David?" "I came to see you," David said, his tone cautious. "To see Ethan." "Well, you've seen him. Now you can leave." "Please, just hear me out," David pleaded. "I know I don't deserve it, but I need to explain." Mrs. Carter's expression softened, but only slightly. "You think you can just waltz back here after 5 years and everything will be fine?" "No," he said. "I know it won't be, but I'm trying to make things right." Mrs. Carter looked at him for a long moment, as though weighing his words. Finally, she stepped aside. "Come in." Ethan scrambled back from the window as his father entered the house. He sat on the couch, pretending to flip through a magazine, though his ears were tuned to every word. In the kitchen, his parents spoke in hushed tones. Ethan couldn't make out everything, but he caught enough. Fragments of explanations, apologies, and anger. "I didn't want you or Ethan to deal with my mistakes," his father said. "And yet we did," his mother replied, her voice sharp. Ethan leaned forward, his heart pounding. The weight of the past was pressing down on all of them, and he couldn't tell if it was about to break them apart or bind them together. After what felt like hours, the voices quieted. Ethan braced himself as his father and mother walked into the living room. Mrs. Carter looked exhausted, her face lined with emotion, while his father seemed subdued. "Ethan," his mother said, her voice gentle but firm, "your dad is going to stay for dinner. We need to talk as a family." Ethan's stomach twisted. He looked at his dad, searching for something, answers, reassurance, maybe even regret. What he saw was vulnerability, a man trying to find his way back to the life he had abandoned. "Okay," Ethan said quietly, his voice barely audible. As his father sat down across from him, Max curled up at Ethan's feet, his presence a comforting weight. Ethan wasn't sure what the evening would bring, but for the first time in years, they were all in the same room. And that, at least, felt like a beginning. The table was set simply, as it always was. Plates slightly mismatched, forks and knives neatly placed, and a vase of wildflowers that Ethan had picked the week before. The atmosphere, however, was anything but ordinary. Ethan sat across from his father, his fork idly poking at the mashed potatoes on his plate. His mother busied herself in the kitchen, bringing over the last dish of roasted vegetables. The silence in the room was heavy, punctuated only by the clinking of utensils and Max's soft panting under the table. Ethan's father, David, cleared his throat, the sound startling in the quiet. "So, Ethan," David began, his voice tentative. "You're in 5th grade now, right?" Ethan looked up briefly, then nodded. "Yeah." David smiled weakly. "What's your favorite subject?" "Science," Ethan replied curtly, dropping his gaze back to his plate. He didn't want to give his father the satisfaction of a real conversation. "Not yet." Mrs. Carter sighed, setting down her own fork. "David, if you want to rebuild a relationship with Ethan, you're going to have to try harder than small talk." David winced but nodded. "You're right. I just don't know where to start." "How about with the truth?" Ethan shot back, his voice sharper than he intended. His mother placed a calming hand on his shoulder. "Ethan, let's hear what he has to say." David put down his fork, taking a deep breath. "I've made a lot of mistakes. Leaving was the biggest one. I thought I was protecting you both from everything I was dealing with, but that was wrong. I see that now." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "What were you dealing with? You keep saying that, but you're not explaining." David hesitated, glancing at Mrs. Carter, who gave him a firm nod. "I lost my job, Ethan. The company I worked for shut down. I tried to find work, but it wasn't easy, and I made some bad decisions. Got involved with people I shouldn't have." Ethan's grip tightened on his fork. "So instead of asking for help, you just left?" "I thought I was doing the right thing," David said softly. "I didn't want my failures to bring you down." "You didn't think leaving wouldn't bring us down?" Ethan's voice cracked with anger and hurt. "Mom had to do everything on her own. And me? I had to grow up without a dad." David's shoulders slumped. "You're right. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But I'm here now, and I want to try to make things right." The room fell silent again, the weight of David's words pressing down on all of them. Max, sensing the tension, rested his head on Ethan's lap, offering quiet comfort. Mrs. Carter finally broke the silence. "David, coming back doesn't erase the years you were gone. Ethan and I learned to live without you. If you want to be part of our lives again, it's going to take time." David nodded solemnly. "I understand. I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Ethan pushed his plate away, his appetite gone. He looked at his father, searching for sincerity in his eyes. "Why now? After all this time, why did you decide to come back?" David hesitated. "Because I realized what I was missing. And when I found Max, it felt like a sign. Like it was time to come home." "Max shouldn't have been the reason," Ethan muttered, standing abruptly. "I'm going to my room." Mrs. Carter started to call after him, but David stopped her. "Let him go," he said quietly. "He needs time." Ethan climbed the stairs to his small bedroom and shut the door behind him. Max followed, curling up on the rug beside the bed. Ethan flopped onto his mattress, staring at the ceiling. His mind was a storm of emotions. Anger, confusion, and a small, nagging flicker of hope. He wanted to believe his father had changed, but trust didn't come easily after so many years of silence. Downstairs, David and Mrs. Carter cleaned up in awkward silence. Finally, Mrs. Carter spoke. "You should know, Ethan's been through more than you realize," she said, her voice firm but tinged with sadness. "He pretends to be strong, but he's just a kid. He needs stability." David looked at her, regret etched into his face. "I know, and I'm going to prove to both of you that I can be the father he deserves." "Good," she replied, handing him a towel. "Because this is your last chance." As the house grew quiet that night, Ethan lay awake, listening to the faint murmur of voices downstairs. Max nudged his hand, and Ethan absent-mindedly stroked the dog's fur. "Do you think he really means it, Max?" he whispered. "Do you think he's really here to stay?" Max didn't answer, of course, but the comforting warmth of his presence made Ethan feel just a little less alone. The next morning, the household was quieter than usual. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, pushing cereal around in his bowl. Max lay at his feet, tail thumping lazily. Mrs. Carter moved about the kitchen, her movements brisk and efficient, but the tension in the air was palpable. David walked in, his steps hesitant. "Good morning," he said, attempting a smile. Ethan didn't look up. "Morning," he muttered, the word barely audible. Mrs. Carter glanced at them both, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm heading into town for groceries," she announced. "Ethan, Why don't you take your dad around? Show him Whitestone. Ethan froze. Why can't he go on his own? Mrs. Carter shot him a look. Because I asked you to, she said, her tone firm. I'll be back in a couple of hours. Ethan wanted to protest but knew it would do no good. With a resigned sigh, he stood, grabbing Max's leash. Come on, Mac. David followed them out, the tension between father and son growing heavier with each step. The streets of Whitestone were alive with the usual morning bustle. Fishermen hauled their catches to market, and shopkeepers arranged fresh displays in their windows. Ethan led the way, his pace brisk as if trying to outrun the awkwardness. David struggled to keep up. Ethan, David said finally, breaking the silence. I know this isn't easy for you. Ethan stopped abruptly, turning to face his father. You think? David sighed. Look, I know I've messed up, but I want to make things right. I want to be part of your life again. Ethan crossed his arms. You can't just walk back in and expect everything to be okay. You don't know me. You don't know what Mom and I went through. You're right, David said, his voice steady. I don't, but I want to. I just need you to give me a chance. Ethan stared at him, his emotions warring inside. Finally, he shrugged and started walking again. Come on. There's one place you should see. The path led them to the cliffs overlooking the sea. The wind was strong here, tugging at their clothes and whipping Ethan's hair into his eyes. He stood at the edge, staring out at the horizon, Max at his side. This was Mom's favorite spot, Ethan said quietly. We used to come here all the time after you left. David stood a few feet back, his gaze fixed on his son. I didn't know. Of course you didn't, Ethan said bitterly. You weren't here. David flinched but didn't argue. What did she tell you about why I left? Ethan hesitated, gripping Max's leash tightly. She said you were going through things, that you needed time to figure yourself out. That's not untrue, David admitted. But there's more to it than that. Ethan turned to him, his eyes sharp. Then tell me the truth. David looked out at the sea, the waves crashing against the rocks below. I told you I lost my job, but that wasn't the whole story. I borrowed money from people I shouldn't have. I thought I could pay it back quickly, but things spiraled out of control. I was scared. For me, for you and your mom. So I ran. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. You ran from us because of money? It wasn't just the money, David said, his voice heavy with regret. It was the shame. I didn't want you to see me as a failure. Well, congratulations, Ethan said coldly. You failed anyway. David's expression crumpled, but he didn't argue. You're right, he said softly. I failed. And I've regretted it every day since. Ethan didn't respond. The wind filled the silence between them, carrying the faint cries of seagulls over the water. Max nudged Ethan's leg, his presence a quiet reminder of the bond they shared. As they walked back toward town, neither spoke. The air between them felt heavy but different, as if the truth had shifted something. Ethan wasn't sure how to feel. Anger still simmered beneath the surface, but so did something else. A small, hesitant flicker of understanding. When they reached the house, Mrs. Carter was unloading groceries from the car. She looked at them expectantly. How was it? She asked. Ethan shrugged, handing her Max's leash. Fine. David gave her a small nod. We talked. Mrs. Carter studied them both, her expression unreadable. Good, she said finally. Dinner's at 6. Ethan retreated to his room, Max trotting after him. As he closed the door, he sat on the floor, stroking Max's fur. His father's words replayed in his mind, the weight of them settling deep in his chest. For the first time, Ethan allowed himself to wonder, could they ever truly heal? Ethan woke the next morning to the sound of rain tapping against his bedroom window. Max lay sprawled across the rug, snoring softly. For a moment, the house was quiet, and Ethan let himself believe everything was normal. But then he remembered the conversation with his dad on the cliffs, and the heaviness returned. He dressed quickly and headed downstairs, Max following at his heels. In the living room, David sat on the couch with a cup of coffee, a tentative smile on his face when Ethan appeared. Morning, David said. Ethan nodded, avoiding his father's gaze. He grabbed a piece of toast from the kitchen and sat at the table, focusing intently on his plate. Mrs. Carter entered, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Ethan, after breakfast, I need you to help me in the attic. We've got boxes to sort through." "Can't Dad help?" Ethan asked, his tone sharper than he intended. "I already asked," Mrs. Carter said, giving him a pointed look. "I need you." Ethan sighed but nodded. "Fine." The attic was dim and musty, the air thick with the smell of old wood and forgotten things. Ethan and his mom worked in silence, pulling down boxes from the rafters and sorting through them. Most were filled with old clothes, books, and family keepsakes. Ethan found a box labeled Ethan's baby things and couldn't help smiling as he sifted through tiny onesies and faded photographs. Mrs. Carter was going through another box when she froze, her expression shifting. She pulled out a smaller, dust-covered container and stared at it for a long moment. "What's that?" Ethan asked, noticing her reaction. "It's your dad's," she said, her voice quiet. She set the box aside and went back to sorting. Ethan's curiosity flared. When his mom wasn't looking, he opened the box. Inside were stacks of papers, old photographs, and a few small trinkets. One photo caught his eye, a picture of his dad holding him as a baby, both of them smiling. "Mom, why didn't you show me this before?" Ethan asked, holding up the picture. Mrs. Carter glanced at the photo, her face softening. "I didn't think it would help. After he left, I wanted to focus on moving forward." Ethan looked through more of the box's contents, finding letters his dad had written but never sent. One, dated 3 years ago, began with the words, "Dear Ethan, I'm sorry I haven't been there. Why didn't he send these?" Ethan murmured, anger and sadness swirling inside him. "I don't know," Mrs. Carter said. "Maybe he didn't think he had the right." Later that evening, Ethan sat in his room, the box of his dad's belongings on the floor beside him. Max rested his head on Ethan's lap, sensing his unease. Ethan held the photograph of himself and his dad, studying the faces in it. They looked happy, like a real family. There was a knock at the door and David peeked in. "Can I come in?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded. David stepped inside, his eyes falling on the open box. "You found it," David said softly, sitting on the floor beside Ethan. "Why didn't you send these letters?" Ethan asked, holding up the stack. David ran a hand through his hair, his expression pained. "Because I was ashamed. Every time I wrote one, I'd convince myself it wasn't enough. That I wasn't enough." "You could have tried," Ethan said, his voice trembling. "I would have listened." David looked at him, his eyes full of regret. "I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for not doing that." They sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Ethan spoke. "I want to believe you, Dad, but it's hard." "I understand," David said. "You don't have to believe me right away. Just let me show you." As the rain continued to fall outside, Ethan handed his father the photograph. "Do you remember this?" he asked. David smiled faintly. "I do. That was your first birthday. You wouldn't let go of the balloon I gave you." Ethan chuckled despite himself. "Mom always said I loved balloons." "She's right," David said, his smile growing. "You'd cry every time one popped." Ethan's laughter faded as he looked at the photo again. "I miss that," he said quietly. "I miss when things felt normal." David placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "We can find a new normal, Ethan, if you're willing to try." Ethan didn't answer right away, but for the first time, he felt a small crack in the wall he'd built around his heart. "Maybe," he said softly, "but you have to promise not to leave again." "I promise," David said, his voice firm. "I'm not going anywhere." The days that followed were tentative, like walking on fragile ice. David made a conscious effort to be present, helping Mrs. Carter with chores and spending time with Ethan. Max seemed to bridge the gap between father and son, often coaxing them into moments of shared laughter during long walks or games of fetch. Yet, the wounds of the past lingered, their edges raw and unspoken. One bright morning, David suggested a trip to the local marina. "You used to love the boats," he said, a hopeful smile tugging at his lips. Ethan hesitated, his instinct to say no battling with the flicker of curiosity in his chest. Finally, he shrugged. Okay. The two of them walked side by side, Max trotting ahead, his leash held loosely in Ethan's hand. The marina was alive with activity. Fishermen unloading their morning catch, seagulls circling overhead.